The soft hum of the airport filled the air as Danielle Rivers, a 34-year-old successful business consultant, rolled her sleek black suitcase through Terminal 3. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit and gold-rimmed glasses, she exuded calm confidence, the kind that came from years of hard work and success. She had just closed a major deal in New York and was heading back home to Los Angeles. Her ticket clearly said first class. She had earned it, every mile, every upgrade, every success. As she boarded the plane, she smiled at the flight attendants greeting passengers. One of them, Caroline, a tall woman in her 40s with a tight bun and colder eyes, scanned Danielle up and down, her smile fading slightly. "Excuse me, ma'am," Caroline said as Danielle placed her carry-on in the overhead bin. "I think you might be in the wrong seat. This is first class." Danielle turned politely, keeping her tone measured. "Yes, I'm aware. Seat 2A." She handed over her boarding pass. Caroline took it, her lips tightening as she examined it. She muttered. "Well, these seats are reserved for first-class passengers. Maybe there was an error in the system." Danielle kept her composure. "No error. I purchased this ticket myself." The attendant gave a curt nod but didn't hide the skepticism in her eyes. Several nearby passengers looked up from their champagne glasses, curious. A few awkward whispers floated through the cabin. Caroline forced a thin smile. "I'll need to verify this with the gate agent. Please step aside for a moment." Danielle's cheeks warmed with embarrassment as she stood in the aisle, feeling dozens of eyes on her. The minutes stretched uncomfortably. When Caroline returned, she shook her head. "I'm sorry, but you'll need to move to economy. There must have been a mix-up." Danielle frowned. "I paid for first class, and you confirmed it was correct." "I'm going to have to ask you to cooperate, ma'am," Caroline said, her tone firm. "We have other passengers boarding." A white man seated nearby, middle-aged, in a business suit, leaned over. "If she doesn't belong here, maybe security should handle it." Danielle's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to fight, but she also didn't want a scene. Quietly, she gathered her bag and followed the attendant toward the back. As she passed through the curtain separating first class and economy, she felt a sting of humiliation that cut deep. She had worked too hard for this, to still be treated as if she didn't belong. She found an empty seat near the back and sank into it, silent. The flight took off. 7 minutes later, the universe decided it had seen enough. A sudden commotion broke out at the front. Caroline, the same flight attendant, was frantically apologizing to a well-dressed man who had just boarded late, Mr. Thompson, the airline's regional director. He was supposed to be in first class, seat 2A, the same one Danielle had been forced out of. The director's brow furrowed. "I specifically arranged for my seat to be reserved for my guest, Ms. Rivers." Caroline froze. "Ms. Rivers?" "Yes," he said sternly. "Danielle Rivers. She's a consultant for our leadership program. She's the reason this partnership even exists." Every drop of color drained from Caroline's face. "Oh, my goodness. I thought you thought what?" Thompson snapped. "That she didn't look like someone who belongs in first class?" Passengers began whispering again, but this time with a different tone, disapproval. Eyes shifted toward the back where Danielle sat quietly, hearing the commotion but not yet understanding. Caroline hurried down the aisle, her voice trembling. "Ms. Rivers. I'm so terribly sorry. There's been a huge misunderstanding. Please, let me escort you back to your seat." Danielle looked up slowly. "Now it's my seat again?" Her voice was calm but sharp enough to cut through the air. The flight attendant stammered. "Yes, of course. It was all a mix-up." Danielle rose, but not before meeting Caroline's eyes. "No need," she said firmly. "I'm fine right here. I'd rather stay where I'm treated with respect than sit where I'm merely tolerated." Her words hung in the air, powerful, clear, undeniable. Mr. Thompson approached moments later, leaning down respectfully. "Danielle, I am so sorry. I'll make sure this never happens again. The airline will personally issue a written apology." Danielle smiled faintly. "Thank you, Michael. But I think the lesson's already been taught." The rest of the flight was silent. Caroline continued working, face pale and eyes downcast. The same passengers who once judged Danielle now avoided looking at her entirely. When the plane landed, Thompson made sure Danielle was the first to disembark, a gesture of dignity she had always deserved. As Danielle walked off the plane, head held high, Caroline stood by the door, whispering a shaky, "I'm sorry." Danielle paused, looked her in the eye, and said softly, "Next time, try seeing people before judging them." And with that, she disappeared into the bright sunlight of the terminal, a reminder that class isn't about where you sit, but how you treat others. Moral: respect should never be determined by appearance, color, or assumption. True professionalism and humanity is shown through fairness, not favoritism. The story didn't end when Danielle Rivers walked off that plane. In fact, it had just begun. Not by the time she reached the terminal, her phone buzzed non-stop. Unknown numbers. Media outlets. Reporters. Someone had recorded the entire incident, the humiliation, the confrontation, and the moment karma struck. The video had gone viral overnight. Within hours, it racked up over 6 million views. The caption read, "Successful black businesswoman kicked out of first class, then her boss shows up." The comments poured in. "She handled that with grace. The flight attendant needs to be fired." This is what quiet strength looks like. Danielle hadn't wanted fame. She had wanted fairness. But now, the world had given her both, in its own way. 3 days later, Danielle sat in her Los Angeles office, overlooking the skyline. Her company phone rang. It was Michael Thompson, the regional director she had worked with on that flight. "Danielle," he said, his tone apologetic. "Corporate saw the video. The CEO himself called me. They want to make things right." Danielle leaned back in her chair. "By doing what exactly?" "They've officially suspended Caroline," he replied. "She's under investigation for discrimination and misconduct. And they want to offer you a public apology at the next leadership event." Danielle hesitated. "A public apology?" "Yes. And they'd like you to lead our upcoming Equality in the Skies initiative. It's a diversity and leadership program across all flight crew divisions." A small smile touched her lips. "That's a start." Meanwhile, at a small suburban home outside Chicago, Caroline sat in silence on her couch. Her phone had been buzzing for days, but not with messages she wanted to read. Her name was trending, for all the wrong reasons. #flight attendant Caroline had become a symbol of bias and arrogance. Old friends stopped replying. Her airline badge lay on the table, confiscated pending review. Tears streamed down her face as she rewatched the video. She saw herself, the cold tone, the dismissive attitude, the way she had treated Danielle as if she didn't belong, and she hated what she saw. Her husband walked in quietly. "You okay?" Caroline shook her head. "No. I made a mistake. A big one." He sat beside her. "Then fix it. Don't hide or face it." 2 weeks later, at a grand hotel ballroom in Los Angeles, the airline held its annual leadership event. Executives, pilots, and flight crews filled the seats. Cameras flashed as Danielle Rivers stepped onto the stage, introduced as the keynote speaker. Her speech was calm, powerful, and real. "Bias doesn't always scream," she began. "Sometimes, it whispers through polite words and company policy. But we all have a choice, to look beyond assumptions, to listen, and to lead with humanity." The room was silent, everyone hanging on her words. Then, at the end of her speech, Danielle paused. "I'd like to invite someone on stage, someone who reached out to me recently. Someone who chose to face her mistake." The audience murmured as Caroline walked out, her eyes nervous but determined. The moment was tense. Caroline took the microphone. "I was wrong," she said softly. "That day on the plane, I didn't see Danielle for who she was, a respected professional, a human being. I saw only what I assumed. And I let that assumption guide my behavior. I've learned more in the last 2 weeks than I did in 20 years of flying. For that, I thank you, Danielle." Danielle nodded, stepping closer. "Growth starts when we face our reflection," she said. "I accept your apology." The audience erupted in applause, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. After the event, the airline announced a new policy requiring bias training for all flight crew and appointed Danielle as a consultant advisor for their leadership reform team. As she left the hotel that night, a reporter stopped her. "Ms. Rivers, how does it feel, seeing karma play out like this?" Danielle smiled. "Karma isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about correction. Sometimes, life doesn't punish, it teaches." Months later, Danielle boarded another flight, this time, greeted with warmth and respect by every crew member. As she took her first-class seat, she looked out the window, calm and confident. Somewhere in the same airline, Caroline was now part of the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, working quietly behind the scenes, ensuring no one else would ever feel the way Danielle once did. And for the first time in a long while, both women flew higher than ever. 6 months had passed since the viral incident that changed both Danielle Rivers and Caroline Myers forever. The world had moved on, but neither of them had forgotten. Danielle had become a respected voice in the airline industry, traveling around the country to lead training programs on professionalism, equality, and empathy. Caroline, humbled and transformed, had quietly rebuilt her reputation by volunteering for community outreach and mentoring new flight attendants about ethics and respect. They hadn't seen each other since that public apology. Until one fateful day, Danielle arrived at JFK Airport for a leadership conference in London. Her assistant handed her the ticket. They upgraded you to first class, Ms. Rivers. She smiled. Irony has a sense of humor. As she boarded the plane, she felt that familiar hum of the engines and scent of jet fuel, symbols of both her worst memory and her greatest growth. She greeted the smiling attendants at the door, and froze. Standing there, in the crisp uniform, was Caroline. Their eyes met. A rush of emotions, surprise, tension, and something unspoken. Caroline's voice trembled slightly, but she held her composure. Welcome aboard, Ms. Rivers. Danielle studied her face, no arrogance, no coldness, just sincerity. Thank you, she replied softly, taking her seat in 2A, the same seat from that unforgettable flight hours past. The plane cruised smoothly at 30,000 feet. Dinner was served, passengers relaxed, and peace settled over the cabin, until a sudden jolt shook the aircraft. The cabin lights flickered. A loud thud echoed from the right wing. Passengers gasped as turbulence hit, violent, unrelenting. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but tense. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing an unexpected engine issue. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. Fear rippled through the cabin. Danielle gripped the armrest, her heart racing. Across the aisle, a child began to cry. A woman whispered prayers under her breath. Then, oxygen masks dropped. The flight crew sprang into action, moving swiftly down the aisles. And right there, in the middle of the chaos, Caroline emerged as a pillar of calm. She moved from passenger to passenger with steady confidence. It's okay. Breathe normally. We're trained for this. Her tone, the same voice that once carried arrogance, now carried reassurance. When a man in the front row began to panic, Caroline knelt beside him, holding his hand. Look at me. You're safe. I promise. Danielle watched in awe. The woman who once caused her pain was now saving others with grace. Moments later, the captain's voice returned. We've stabilized the situation. We'll be making an emergency landing in Newfoundland. Applause broke out. Relief swept through the cabin. After landing safely, paramedics boarded to assist a few shaken passengers. Caroline checked each row, her face pale but composed. When she reached Danielle, they locked eyes again, this time, with mutual respect. You were incredible, Danielle said quietly. Caroline shook her head. No. I just did my job. Danielle smiled. No, Caroline. You redeemed it. For the first time, Caroline's eyes glistened. I used to think first class was about luxury, she said softly. Now I know, it's about responsibility. To treat every person with worth. Danielle nodded. That's the lesson the skies were waiting to teach us. A few weeks later, the airline released a public statement praising the crew for their heroic actions during the emergency. Danielle personally requested that Caroline be recognized at the company's annual awards ceremony. When the day arrived, Caroline stood on stage in her uniform as Danielle handed her the Outstanding Service and Leadership Award. Cameras flashed, but this time, it wasn't a scandal. It was a story of redemption. Caroline spoke humbly. 6 months ago, I failed my duty as a flight attendant and as a person. But life gave me a second chance, to do better, to be better. And I took it. The audience rose in applause. Danielle joined her on stage, embracing her in a moment of forgiveness that spoke louder than any words. Months later, the two women worked side by side on a new airline initiative called Wings of Equality. Their mission, to train staff worldwide on empathy, leadership, and inclusion. Every flight, every training, every speech carried their shared story, from humiliation to healing, from bias to bravery. A quiet evening flight months later, Danielle looked out at the glowing horizon and smiled. You know, she said to Caroline, it's funny how life works. We started as strangers in conflict, and ended up as partners in purpose. Caroline finished. The sky outside shimmered in gold and blue, as if blessing the peace they had both earned. And somewhere above the clouds, karma smiled too, not as punishment, but as grace.